lot of the stuff during the conference that we heard was a lot of conversation around value and metrics and things like that. I've always sort of sat back and said the first and foremost metric we have to have in S&OP is sort of a customer-facing metric. And so many people get metrics wrong. For me, we use Walmart as a proxy for our customer delivery because we do everything the same way in our distribution center.
Right.
And it's a tough metric. They're narrowing the metric. They're making it tighter. So we use that as our measure of whether we're actually executing against the customer. I'm curious what other people are doing.
Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah.
Because that's the standard. If you can succeed with Walmart, you're going to succeed with pretty much everybody else because their standards are so much higher.
Okay.
And putting that through, their stringent MABDs, you've got to make sure that you have the right fill rate, safety stocks, all those kinds of things.
It's perfect fill in a window.
Exactly.
And they're tightening the window. They're actually making the metric tougher in the bottom of it, tighter. It's now 90% now. They're popping it up to 95% sometime in 2017. I'm always curious what people use as metrics because it's a struggle, and you come to these conferences and one of the first questions I always get asked is what are the metrics? I have to tell you, there's another question that I get asked a lot. I'm not sure whether you get it a lot, and I think it's just like the first bit of process inertia. Do you ever get asked questions about what does an agenda look like? Oh, like you get
which frustrates me actually.
Really fundamental, basic questions about S&OP. And you wonder whether there's a collective learning. Like we're missing something in the collective learning that
they don't know how to start.
They don't know how to start. They don't know how to put together an agenda.
I think for a lot of folks it comes down to selling solutions versus selling a product, S&OP being considered a product.
Right.
And if you start with an agenda and literally walk into your milestone meetings in the upper level side of S&OP and you put a whiteboard statement, one thing that that's supposed to orient the entire meeting and keep you from going off topic. So demand planning, when you're in there with commercial, do you sign up to this plan? Is this now handing off to be your plan?
Right.
Because the one responsible for executing the plan is the one responsible to agree to it.
Right.
Supply, can we hit the forecast? Right?
Yeah.
Financial review or IRR, is this feasible? And then what do the executives need to tie break? And if you start from there, agenda building is really a lot easier to do.
Please go ahead. I was going to say, a lot of people, I think, though, try to start with the data, and they generate all these metrics, and then they try to figure out how to put that data or those metrics into an agenda or into a presentation. And really, to your point, it's about answering questions and reducing risk in our business because we've asked the right questions.
I always thought, I never understood whether it's because some of the people that come to these there's a lot of new people just being introduced to S&OP or companies just starting, so they send people here to learn and train about S&OP. But why, I've always had this question, like why agendas?
I think that you guys hit a nail on the head, which is how do you actually engage discussion, right? So, for me, the consensus meeting, right, there was always the three little words that you put at the end of the meeting, which was, do you agree, right? Just like you guys said. So that's the discussion, right? And, again, you can't put that into an agenda, right? Somebody has to really foster that. And I think that's something that we want to build.
So let me ask you, this is kind of a tactical question, but do you guys require a formal physical signature as part of your executive S&OP process?
I don't.
No, I have not.
I was joking earlier with you guys when I said, perhaps a future session is actually going to be, and we can bring in all kinds of speakers outside of our normal thought process, the psychology and philosophy of true S&OP success. Maybe even, get some kind of psychologist to come in here and talk about how to manipulate people. And, you talk to car salesmen and half the time think you're doing well, and then they put out a random piece of paper and make you sign on it just to get you in the mentality. And that's such a great thing to bring up. No, I think more often than not it's somebody typing away at the minutes. And then you have that short-term amnesia at an executive level when you walk out. Love it.
Right.
It is an interesting concept because now you're forcing people to commit to a plan.
Yeah.
And there's no hedging afterwards. You're all in the meeting. Your name's on a piece of paper. I didn't say that. Well, you signed the document that said you understood what was going on. So next time you should probably pay a little bit more
I think there's
attention.
different ways to do it though, because especially you think about business with complexity. Do you sign to what plan, right? The launch plan of this SKU, right? The decrease in this other category, what happens? So I think it's the decisions along the way. So, I mean, you need a level of commitment. I think that's key, right? However
Right.
you do that, whether it's verbal, right? Whether it's written, but usually if there's more than one decision there, and then for a lot of us, there's lots of shades of gray. So do we agree that that's the number? Well, we all agree that that's not going to be the number that it's going to end up with, right? When you're talking about a demand plan
Right.
or a supply plan. But is this the direction we're going to go in?
Right.
Yes. How are we going to monitor it, right? Maybe that's as equally important.
I have to tell you, last night I had, sort of changing subjects a little bit, I had an interesting conversation during dinner last night. Part of the networking that we get out of these conferences, and it went to the value of forecast accuracy and S&OP in general, and there were some touches upon that during some of the panel discussions. I can show a whole bunch of quantitative benefits to S&OP, and part of my conversation was there's no benchmark, no standard model. It's very specific to a company. You can't, I can't say 1% forecast accuracy yields a 1% reduction in inventory because everyone handles inventory differently
Right,
across the
exactly.
board. My company saw 25% reduction in inventory, but where we make our own products, we don't contract manufacturer except for maybe 3 or 4% of our total product line. We have a single point of distribution in the U.S. and Canada. It was easy for us, I think, to get that inventory savings. I'm curious what other savings that you got that were either similar or different than the inventory savings I saw.
I'll maybe just jump in and just maybe take a different spin on it. I think, we talk about S&OP being a business planning process, and yet we always go back to forecast accuracy, service, and inventory, which are really supply chain metrics, right? And, I've had the situation where, okay, we're accurate in our demand, and the demand is 20% off plan.
Right.
So we've got a bigger problem, right? So if you really want to make that a true
Right.
business planning process, how do we solve for the 20%? Okay, we got it accurate, that's good, but that's really only the beginning.
Well, your business is out of control.
Yeah.
You can have great forecast accuracy, but your business
That's
is
right.
completely out
That's
of
right.
control.
That's
So
right.
now here's an opportunity to get back in control. Interesting.
But don't you think at the end of the day, that's all driving back to being more customer centric and
Yeah.
really starting at the end, which is with the customer, and driving that back
Right.
into the organization versus starting with this is what we can produce, this is what we can do, and really starting with what does our
should we?
customer want?
The term demand optimization is really where you start to move beyond planning and management and control into things are going well, accuracy seems okay, but like a solver equation in Excel, what could we optimize better? If we've been at this S&OP cycle and we've already made trade-offs and constraints and now we're performing well to those decisions, is our current mix of our forecasts, of the way we're allowing
Right.
customers to, we're sensing their needs, but are we guiding them to what we want?
Shaping
Where could we come in and say, we're
Very true.
93% accurate here, but this isn't the most profitable product. We should
Yeah.
drive this down and increase this. I think S&OP needs to go from being relegated to just being a stewardship function and into a shaping function, so that you get that next level of how many CEOs 10 years from now, God willing, can come out of being S&OP owners.
Oh, there you
That's
go.
going to be where you get to the sweet spot, and it starts to really get elevated. And I'm not sure if it's a good springboard point, but I love coming here because consultants all try to dance around this topic. If you guys have an opinion one way or the other and you want to advocate for why, what are your thoughts on having dedicated S&OP roles? And what do those look like, and why do you think they're needed or not needed?
Absolutely, I think it absolutely is important. I'm in a situation now where I went from being the dedicated S&OP person to now where I am also in charge of demand planning and inventory. And there's too many fires sometimes to hit when you have that dual role. And so I think it comes down to me where if I could focus completely on S&OP, we'd have less fires to fight.
Right.
But I think I'm kind of sometimes divided in what I could put attention to.
That's actually a really interesting comment, because I've always thought it was really difficult for the average person to have sort of that within a moment accordion thinking. that you have to think big, like you'd want to think inside of S&OP, and
Right.
then go and firefight around some sort of inventory problem for a
Right.
specific SKU serving a specific
Absolutely.
customer.
Absolutely.
And if you spend so much time in the trenches with a fire hose, over your shoulder, you're not necessarily going to have the opportunity to think bigger and broader and look at bigger opportunities inside the business.
Exactly.
So having a dedicated role is actually an interesting solve. The problem
Yeah.
is most organizations are running
They don't
so
see the value in
lean.
it yet, and they really don't see it.
And I guess I kind of see it from a different perspective in that I think you have to be careful that you're not segmenting it such that it's no longer relevant and
In the
engaged
business.
into
Right.
the business. So I think part of it is elevating the position to a strategic role within the company so that maybe 50% of your time you're dedicated to S&OP type work, and the other 50% of the time you're managing the resources that are doing the firefighting and you're directing those resources, so that you overall that all works together. You're still connected to the business, but you're in a much more strategic capacity.
One of the things I've found is I've always had some responsibility while leading S&OP, so I've always had some skin in the game. And all of us know that people hate being measured, so you start putting up a measure for some other group besides your own, it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
So what I've always done is say, okay, I have skin in the game. I'm going to start measuring. Look at me. I'm measuring myself, and I'm twisting the Rubik's cube on all my measures. I'm really dissecting my metrics, and I'm doing this because guess what? In a couple months, I'm going to be coming to you and doing the same. But I've already proved myself as an honest agent.
Right.
That I'm here measuring myself, and I'm not sure if you all have experienced that, but.
I think that's right. I think you have to have that openness, right? I think the other thing that sort of comes through is regardless of the organization design, you have to have that cross-process role, right? And I think that's key, right? And that's a lot of times where people fall down is, people are each doing their work, but, S&OP is really about getting that agreement and the discussion across functions and solving the best business solution across the business, right? So
Right.
I think you can do that with, a lot of times you need to
Right.
do that with a dedicated role.
Right.
You can try it other ways too, but
I think
that's
that
the goal.
person becomes a neutral party that can become embedded
Yeah,
in each
that's
camp,
true.
though. You know what I mean? Because now it's like, okay, I'm no longer, there's that adversarial role between sales and operations that we're also aware of. And so sometimes that still clouds their perception of me as an S&OP leader. So for me, I preferred being independent because I could be, I'm your ally, I'm your friend, and I can help you get things
Advocate,
done. And
yeah.
I could do that with every group. I could be that chameleon in each group and to bring back and help them get through it.
So you considered yourself.
Exactly.
They saw you as being more neutral
I was an
because you
advocate,
weren't within
Right.
any of
and
the
I was there
organizational
to help them
functions.
improve the processes so they can achieve their objectives individually and our larger objectives as a group. But there's something really interesting in what you said, is that having that direct those resources, if you still have that, okay, well, that works really great if you have a good team. Right?
Yeah.
And that was one of the questions I got asked the most after my session today was, how do you find the right people? So I'm glad there were sessions on that today in the conference itself, but for me, that was my biggest key, and I was telling them, for me, I thought personally, I don't really look for people who have a ton of experience in supply chain necessarily, just that certain analytical feeling and that being able that gut instinct and that intellectual curiosity. So I'm curious to see what you guys would say about what makes the people that you would look for your HR decisions if you have a team.
It's an interesting question because if you read all the surveys and studies, they say there's going to be a need for 450,000 supply chain professionals over the next 10 years. And there aren't schools pumping them out
No.
at that rate of change. There aren't guidance counselors in high schools saying to the 17 and 18-year-old kids that this is a potential career path. And it was interesting when I was asking questions in the opening about, where did you come from? And only one person in a room of 300 people actually said that they started out doing supply chain as a destination profession.
Right.
And I think we have to start enhancing what S&OP is so that it does become sort of an aspired to destination
So I guess my question to
profession.
you would be, does it need to be a destination profession or does it need to be a destination role? Okay, so role being, I want to be the chief financial officer. I want to be the chief executive officer. Because I think the diversity, the dichotomy in background is part of what makes supply chain so interesting, is that you don't have everybody that's been a finance major or an accounting major or an engineering major. You have this kind of broad cross-section, and it would seem to me that it is more effective to say, we want being the chief supply chain officer to be one of those really prestigious C-suite roles.
Right.
So I think there's something pretty profound in what you brought up, and that's that a lot of folks still have the notion that the end-all be-all of S&OP is just roles still coming out of the supply chain function. And I think that the true end-all be-all is literally to have it as that development opportunity for the C-suite that is independent of and part of the P&L ownership matrix across a business.
Right.
Because what we really want to be able to have is take this from being a supply chain birthed program
Right.
and prescriptive process into something where your green berets and best of the best from FP&A, finance, maybe even human resources
Right.
come out of add something different, and you kind of have less and less incidents of CEOs coming directly most of the time out of the commercial function.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Absolutely. I would love to see it where it's a development program. You know, where they bring you in like a college grad. You know, we recruit heavily at college campus. You bring it in, come into our, our supply chain S&OP development program, and you spend time in demand planning. You spend time in supply production if you have it there. Spend some time in finance. Spend some time in marketing. And get that full view of everything, and then elevate it that way. I would love to see that start to happen.
You see, I'm probably a naysayer on this, but I want to see that in a curriculum.
Right.
I want to see a real supply chain curriculum and people being put into it that has all that. So you're getting people that are well prepared coming out of school, that they understand master production scheduling, at least at this level. They understand
Right.
basic forecasting and forecasting math and forecasting algorithms. They understand supply chain metrics. They come out of schools prepared, so we
Right.
don't have to do internal
Right.
development. Absent that, I absolutely agree with you. You have to develop it. And I really agree with you. I love the diversity of people that you see inside the supply chain, but we're always, always, always training people.
I think we need both. I mean, I think, if you think about planning, you need planning skills, right? It's not strong enough, right? We don't have enough people coming in. There's obviously a huge need for it. But then S&OP, right, is to me about leadership, right? And so that role has to be taken by someone who's going to be a business leader,
Right.
right?
Right.
And use all of the skills of influencing and analysis and decision making and buy-in, right? And really bring that to bear. So I think that's right. When you actually think about that translating into C-suite or people who have
Right.
high potential folk coming in and out of that role, bringing new things.
Right.
I think that's really where it
I always thought that it was one of those rotation roles at this level of an organization that people should pass through
agree.
for a year or two to sort of understand the dynamics. If you're going to be a COO or even a CEO, you should at some point in time as you're progressing, maybe in your 15th or 20th year of your career, you should touch on S&OP leadership. So.
Absolutely. And I think this has taken us to a really high level, and kind of when I think about what my hopes are for S&OP as a real thing, and I've used that inside of my employers in the past, is this a real thing or not? What my hope is that when we need to start it with the education and the building the talent management in our institutions, they make their decisions off of where they see the jobs.
Absolutely.
So it is up
Right.
to the practitioners that come to conferences, that take these roles, to kind of have some manifest destiny and to push within their own organizations. I want this to be a real thing. I can prove a value proposition. We can create longevity and sustainability and life cycles of people coming through. And human resources, please, human resources, can you be involved and realize that this is not the same skill set that you apply to operations, HR management? And how do we really elevate it, groom it, create the opportunities that then create the demand all the way back in the chain at the institutions to really make this something special?
You'd love to see the academic treatment of it.
Right.
And because academic treatment will bring something that this field is severely lacking, and that's standardization. There is, and we sort of discussed it, there's not one standard S&OP process model. And some people have put together what they believe to be a standard, but it's proprietary. You can't use it. You can't draw it down. So yeah, essentially what you're doing is having people with 40 different graphical representations of what S&OP is, and it can be confusing. Four or five at least maturity models that talk to different levels with different labels on them and different criteria by which to determine maturity.
So what I think I hear that you're advocating is that supply chain or S&OP now becomes, a class that you take similar to taking leadership as part of your MBA or finance as part of your MBA, and that S&OP has that focus. And within it, you would talk about, here's all the different models, and here's the different types of results that you can get, and things of that nature.
Well, in most curriculums, and even business curriculums, you'll have that one capstone case study class. And imagine having a capstone class, which is really an S&OP class, because S&OP draws from all the supply chain disciplines where, okay, I'm now having a transportation and logistics problem, I'm now having a production problem, and those become case studies within an S&OP class, which is that capstone class for a supply chain major.
That is so interesting that you say that, because when I did my MBA, we had a capstone. We played a game over the course of 3 weeks. And looking back, we absolutely could have called that S&OP, but we didn't. And so then, to your point, having people really understand and make that transition to say, you did this, you loved it, right? You played this game and it was great and you understood the benefits. Until you just said that, I honestly never in my mind really made that connection. So,
and this requires academic treatment, it requires research. Everything that happens at a university starts with some sort of research. And there's a couple people out there doing it now, but there's one or two. There's not 200. So it's an interesting dynamic. That's what I hope for
the great news is, there's so much opportunity, right?
Right.
That's true.
So much places we can
Absolutely.
take this area, right?
Absolutely.
I think we should collaborate on an S&OP 101 textbook. What do you think?
I'm all for it, absolutely.